Well, I'm Dr. Chris Lamont, and in this format, I'm answering a few questions. I have a plethora of questions from people about the workshop I put out that was finding your way with patterns. Little reflection on that. Anyway, it was about unconscious patterns. And I have people asking questions, and yes, I went to college. I took all those classes. I read tons and tons of books. I got a couple thousand books in the living room. Uh, but when I start to go back and look at definitions, because before I answer someone's question, I want to make sure that the fantasy in my head is somewhat closely associated with the fantasy in science today. And I started looking around, and I could find conflict just on definitions between conscious and subconscious. And so I'm going to answer the questions from the world of Chris Lamont. And, a lot of times I throw stuff at you guys from books because I read a lot of books, but I'm just like, okay, this is the juice I squeezed out of it. Right. I know, I had a group of people come to me one time many years ago when I had a center, and they said, "Hey, here's a new book. This is really neat. What do you think of it?" And it's like, come on, there's a new book coming out all the time. And I, at the time, was reading along a certain theme, which I used to do. I used to read a theme rather than diversity. And all of a sudden, I started noticing that as I read a theme, why at some point in time, I'd start to question the theme. And I thought, okay, this is good news. I should think this to be true, and then I should play with it until it runs its gamut. And then I could go in a different direction. Then I decided, wow, maybe I just need to have more diversity all the time. And then maybe I arrive at like a bigger range of being able to question everything without having to go down so many different paths for a year. And so I changed my direction. So this is where I come from today, right? In the very beginning, when we were working with people and they would tell you their story, whether there's something they dreamed or something they made up or something they think is truth, and they're sitting there talking to you. And I'd start looking at that, and I would see or feel, or, we used to see a picture. A picture is, in definition, is a sensory perception. A picture is a symbol. But when we say a picture, it means any one of your five senses. So sometimes I'd be sitting in front of someone and smell something and say, "What is that?" It would actually come through really strong. And sometimes I'd hear sounds. And so most certainly there was like a recording device inside you that's playing. And because I'm sitting there and training with you, empathetic connection, all of a sudden I'm sensing that. It's like, wow. I had to practice a little bit to decide whether I'm playing it or you're playing it. But with a little bit of practice, 6 months or so of doing some of this type of work, then you get to like, oh, wow, you're playing a song in your head. I can hear that. I could either recognize it or I don't recognize it. We could have a conversation about it. Most of the time, those are subconscious. Just like we breathe, we don't have to worry about it, but we can think about it and breathe, right? Both of those go. So it means it's conscious or subconscious. It bounces back and forth. A lot of the healing work that people get, they would go in and they'd have an epiphany. They would all of a sudden say, "Oh, I've just discovered because, my dad did this or my mother did this, then this happened and blah, 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 blah." Personally, I felt trapped to that too. I was playing with longer and longer meditations to see if I could open up a theme and discover more depth. In other words, my style of meditation was to get quiet, get peaceful, no sounds and the music playing in the back, no blah, blah, blah. It's just simply, I just take a topic and it might be a theme. It might be like, what am I really good at? Where's my skill set? I'm trying to discover what's comfortable for me. What's my skill set? I go into meditation and start to get clues. And if I followed the clues, I'd find out more about me. When I found out more about me, I found, wow, I have discovered my skill sets. I'm really good at this or that and not so good at what I thought I should be doing. All right, so I discovered a lot. And those all come to pieces where had stories attached to them. Then I could sit down, I could tell, like I'm telling you a story right now. I could tell stories about them. I had stories about me. I had stories about other people. Of course, the stories about other people, I had to pick a fictitious person. And sometimes, sometimes the story gets all turned around depending on the audience. It's not so much a lie. It just means it needs to be altered, right? And I had to be very, very careful sometimes because you have to tell a story and you have to make the story, the value of the story come through and not put something in there that makes the people judge you, because then they lose the value of it and they go to their defense piece. So stories are always some variation of something that happened that accommodates the listener or the listening group. And so people come back and said, I've heard you tell that story before, but last time it was this way and this time it's this way. And I said, yeah, different audience. You gotta pay attention to who's out there. You don't do any good if you offend someone. I had about 40 people in a Kabbalah workshop, and I said, if you have any questions, why? And a lady then contacted me and said, you presented it all wrong, and I doubt very much anybody's going to come back next week. Well, of the 40 people, I had one person that didn't come back, and that's the one that said I did it all wrong. All the rest of the people went all the way through the workshop. So we played with the Kabbalah, and it was kind of interesting. I wound up with somebody in there was in a newspaper. So I had a newspaper article come out, local newspapers, saying I had done that. So then I had a few rabbis contact and say, wow, it's not part of our religious structure, but it is history has a connection between Jewish people and the Kabbalah. And so it would be nice if you would come to our temple and do a little talk. We have kind of interest talks. So I wound up doing a lot of little talks on it, and we'd have these discussions, which were profound because I had a view of it, but not necessarily a religious view of it. So it started building a bigger range. And through that connection with them, I had all kinds of other people. So I wound up doing that workshop or some variation of that. Once again, when I was talking in the temples, I got corrected a lot for my poor pronunciations of Aleph or one of the Hebrew terms, right? So, which I never got anywhere else. And I don't have a problem with it. I learned a lot from it. And that was the whole idea. I was there and I'm thinking, oh, yeah, if I'm going to do this, I better be respectful of the enunciation, which is my poor suit. As a kid growing up, I was never much of a reader. I didn't actually read a book until my senior year of high school. So I would actually, in grades, I would have my grandmother, sweet lady. She didn't like to move around a lot. I didn't know at the time, but later on I found out she had cancer, which is why she wasn't moving much. But she would sit there in first grade, second grade, third grade. She would read all the books to me, and I'd listen and I'd memorize them. So we go to page 45, and I could tell you what was on that page. So that way, I never had to look at the words. I just got all the way through school, just getting someone to read the books, and I would memorize them. So probably built my memory up quite a bit. That's why I could teach hundreds and hundreds of classes all over the place on all kinds of topics and never have any notes. I got it all stored somewhere, not in here, but somewhere, right? That's a different topic. So when we start to look at where those little patterns are, we started working with a lot of subconscious patterns, which had a big story, which had an epiphany. And what I discovered in the context of what was called then a healer, I would discover that it made things better for the person, better managed, but it didn't eliminate it. There was a little, what I started calling a little speed bump behind it. Speed bumps are those little irritated things that one thing is to put up a sign saying 25. Another thing is to every 10 yards have a speed bump, which it's just like, you know, it's like having two signs. It just doubles down. So I realized that there was a double down. There was a double blind, as Gregory Bateson would say. There's another piece in there. So I started reading a different genre of books, like Gregory Bateson and a lot of other people in that genre at the time, being able to see what is, what in social linguistics, what in the structure of the way that we think and the way that we act, is that tied up in words. And what I discovered working with people, it's not so much tied up with a little snippet of words. Most of the time, it's tied up in with just a statement of movement. And then I started recalling observations where I would see babies react to a movement of some sort. They would respond to a movement. And once they got a movement learned, maybe the idea was to tell them not to touch the oven, it's hot. So you'd find them start to touch the oven and they would remember it's hot. And they'd have their hands there for a little bit, not touching it. And then they'd pull their hand away because you could see the brain going off. It's like, don't touch the oven. But the idea of when it's hot and when it's not is an uncertainty. They don't know when it's hot or not until they touch it, right? So they start to feel close to it. Well, that's what we would do, an adult would do. They would go, oh, wow, that feels like it might be warm. I shouldn't touch that. It's smart. And if you've ever picked up a hot pen, you probably think I should have held my hand next to it without touching it for a few seconds to feel the warmth before I grabbed it. Absolutely, without a doubt. Those are all learning pieces. So unconscious, most of the time, those little unconscious patterns are simply a movement. When you get to them, this is why the exercises were designed the way they were. It's just a movement. Now, that seems kind of silly that that's a problem. But after a while, if you're a baby and somebody jabbed you with a diaper pin in the old days, who used pins on diapers, if they would do that, the baby would just move away from that pin, right? Maybe yap a little bit, but most certainly their body would move. After a while, you would see that if something came along that was kind of creepy or a bug or something, maybe they would move back from it. So all of a sudden, that little pattern of movement from something that could be a challenge to you, why all of a sudden gets integrated into a lot of other structure. Then you have subconscious patterns. That means that if we think about them, we can get into the story of it. Stories have a function. Stories allow us to put ourselves in a picture because when we look out, our eyes are here and what we're viewing is out here. So when we tell it again, we say, I saw. We include us. And then we can say, I saw, and I didn't like what I saw, or I liked what I saw, or whatever. And so it integrates you into the story. That's how we get into it. That's the reason of it. So it's not important that the story parts be true. If they're a little fabricated or imagined, it's all right, because it's really a tool to get you into it. This tool, this brain and this body, is all about survival. So those movement pieces, that little snippets and unconscious patterns, for the most part, I see are about survival. Even the ones that have crazy little sounds in them, like growling sounds and weird sounds I've got with possessed people, even those little pieces with the sounds in them are really a movement, kind of like that type of a piece. That would be not unusual to find in one of those, not a story. So when these people say, oh, I discovered, this epiphany of truth that's affected my whole life, and they go on for 2 hours about the story, it tells me they have not got into an unconscious pattern, because that's not going to be in there. Now, after you get rid of some unconscious patterns, in the next few weeks, you'll see some of those subconscious patterns that got their movement, got their direction, got their force. Energy produces movement. emoting. And so then it has a feeling like, wow, come on, you're sitting in a car and it feels a certain way. You start it up and you drive down the road, it feels different. You get up to 80 and 90 or 100 miles an hour, it feels totally different, right? So those are different feelings so it gets, when that energy starts to get movement, it's moving, it's emoting. And then, of course, we like to label all this stuff because we're storytellers. So we put names on all these emotions, and then we recognize an emotion, and then we go to the story and we don't have the experience. We rob ourselves so often of all those experiences. It's okay to say, wow, oh my goodness, I feel thirsty. I should go get a drink. Okay, I could do that. I could do that. Or I could sit here for a moment and say, wow, it's kind of interesting. I now have access into my body, an attention piece that's not normally there, because the sensor's on the outside of your body. They're not on the inside, right? You don't have a sensor in your stomach. It's all of these are out here, right? So that's what that whole meridian system is. It's connections from inside the body to sensory perception. So you look at this and you go, oh, okay, body, why am I thirsty right now? Is it low on water? Is it H2O problem? Is there something else going on? Can I attend to that? Can I sit with that for a moment? Can I just be with that for a moment and say, yeah, I'll get a drink of water in just a minute. It's not an urgency. I don't want messages always coming to me with crises and emergencies. I just really want to be able to have a different relationship with it so that I can get in the habit of having a bottle of water with me or whatever it takes if I'm going to be in the heat. I want to be able to use my intellect. I want to be able to get a hold of it rather than have the alarms go off. The alarms go off are very frustrating because then you're in this state of you have to do something right away. How many people are dancing around a bathroom because, they're not always easy to plan ahead, right? So you start to relate to those and you go, wow, it's kind of interesting. And the next thing I know, the dryness in my throat is gone. It doesn't mean I don't need water. It just means that I could turn the alarm off. It could just be a communication. How many times you've been with a group of people and you're walking down a trail and all of a sudden there's a little snake goes across the trail and you look at it and you go, oh, there's a snake. But someone else in the group is screaming and hollering and running around. And it's like, oh my goodness, what are you doing? It's just a snake going across the trail. Just like it lives here, this is where it lives. Just leave it alone. You don't have to scream and holler. You see all that because the alarms went off and they were ready to run off from. So I had snakes for a while, so I understand. They're not a warm, fuzzy pet. They're really not much fun. Truthfully, I had them for a short time and I got rid of them, but I had them. I experimented with it. I played with it, it's like whatever. So I don't have an aversion to it. I see one in my yard every now and then and I say hi to it and it kind of stops and pauses and does its thing. It's got a structure of life. It needs to have a certain amount of body heat because it's not warm like us. And so those act out reactionary pieces, crazy pieces. We really don't need to have. My biggest dilemma with them is somebody says something that's not quite true. Then I'll come back and say, well, have you considered this view of that or this view? So now they probably think I'm some kind of a wise ass, I guess. But, it's just kind of like I see somebody come up with an answer from some uncertainty, and I think maybe you should look a little bigger, right? Yes, I'm just a runaway teacher, and I just, and so I don't feel bad when people say, hey, who asked you? And I go, you're right. I'm sorry, because I forgot. You're right. You write a check, send me a check, give me a check, and then I'll explain what you don't know. Yeah, that's the way this works. I keep forgetting that, right? Because I just want to be helpful. none of that's important to me, but it's this hierarchy of protocols. Where did they all come from? Did somebody make it all up? Probably. Right? I don't know. So you start to see all those little movement pieces are influenced. Remember, I'm all about what influences you and what influences me. Actually, the truth is, I'm more interested in what influences me, but it's been really tough to figure out. When I spend time with you and see what influences you, I realize more than likely I'm influenced the same way. And then I can go in and I can find it. We used to call them a matching picture, but then I found later on there wasn't enough information to have an image in it. It's a really more of a matching movement, a drive, a push, a diversion, a jump, that type of reaction in your body. And that piece can get anything attached to it, associated with it, and it can get very complex. And then all of a sudden, you've got a habit piece. But a guy come visit us from Norway one time, and he had a little thing in his voice as he would talk. And I thought, wow, maybe he's got a throat problem. I was trying to think of a way to politely ask him if he's got an issue, but yeah, he was kind of short span of attention. Nice, very nice person, short span of attention. And then we went to visit him in his country, and he toured us around like we toured him around here in America. And then I found out that his family and his parents and everybody in the neighborhood, we were sitting in a restaurant and everybody's going, so it was probably part of their culture. Could have been something to do with language or something. I have no idea. But anyway, I was kind of glad then I'd never said anything to him, because he probably has no idea he does it, because it's very normal for him. And I did have a little short conversation with his sister. She was really sweet, and she was a college student at the time. So we were talking about habit patterns, and I mentioned that, and she said, yeah, I've noticed that too, going to school. People from different areas have different characteristics and how they express themselves. And I thought, wow, I like the way she put that, characteristics and how you express yourself. I just thought he was broken. What did I know? All right. So it was just an element here. He was broken. And I'm thinking maybe I should work with him. Maybe he's got something going on. And hey, you don't have anything going on. It's just part of culture. Too big to be an unconscious piece, a snippet in him. That's going to be a pattern somewhere, sits in culture. That's another whole thing that's really, really hard to get to. Getting someone out of there. Hey, come on. Some people can leave a country and lose their accent totally, and other people keep it forever, right? No idea. I have seen, when I was 9, it's the first time I traveled through, I had to think for a minute. When I was 9, I traveled through the South, and I noticed the Southern accent, which I was not familiar with because I came from Pennsylvania. And I didn't realize I had an accent until I got to California, and everybody teased me, right, about my accent. So in the South, I heard the Southern accent. Now, when I travel and go through there, I don't get that very much. And most certainly, I can get that in certain areas, certain people, but I really don't think it's a product of education losing it, because I see lots of people that are college professors, have education, that have been to talks to, and they still display an accent. I think it's television that did it. I think all of a sudden all those kids aren't raised by their family with an accent anymore. They're raised by a television which doesn't have the accent, and so they don't play it through. You understand where the idea of working with an uncertain unconscious piece, they're both uncertain and unconscious, but that unconscious piece narrows it down to a little snippet, which produces a movement or reaction in you. And then that gets tied to all kinds of crazy stuff. And then you're acting out. If you get rid of that, then the acting out piece, you can remove. You can just sit it and say, wow, You can story index it. You can play with it. You can fantasize through it. You can do a lot of therapeutic things, tons of things, but all you really have to do is attend to it for a while, and it all kind of falls apart. Like stories, you like, okay, I told that story, I get it, and I get some of it wasn't true. Okay, so we just say, oh, I don't remember that part of it. That's what we say. Absolutely true. No problem, right? That's the very nature of it. The little snippets of movement are hard ones to get to. They really are. And most of the time when I worked with someone that was totally possessed, I mean, they were just like weird. They're flopping around the floor and they were making weird sounds, or they were in huge pain, or they would just pass out. All kinds of experiences with him. And I would work with them, and I'd find, oh yeah, they'd have demons talking to them, and they'd see things, and there's people that are filming them, and and the aliens are pulling away at night, and blah 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 blah. All those are phenomena because they're having an experience, and this is legitimately the way that they express it in a story index. All right, that maybe is very different than your story index because you're not having the same phenomena they're having. So you're going to have to communicate through that story index. But a lot of times when I got down there, I was able to separate those two away. The element that bonded them together was a diversion or a movement. And the movement that basically was a withdrawal. It basically said, I have no value. And it pulled the idea of you out. And then some other fabricated idea gets moved in. And that's what I had discovered. So I could work it all the way down to that movement, talk to that other fabricated piece, dialogue with it, send it its way, right? Just move it out. Yes, when the Jesuits do it, they pray and it leaves because it gets tired of their prayer. Okay, but I get it. I would just simply put an object outside. I'd fabricate, I'd create an object outside. I'd have it match its energy like a magnet, and it would suck it out. It would just go, wants to go hang with its friends. And then all of a sudden, I would take that little snippet on that little piece of pattern of movement, and I would take that and reduce it or eliminate it if I could, and they would come back in. Problem solved. And so I've been working with these for a long time. At first, it was just in possessions, but then later, as I did more and more quote unquote healing work, I find that we could get rid of subconscious pieces, but somewhere deeper, when people stayed around a little longer, somewhere deeper, we could sit there and find. And there's all kinds of oddities that occur up when you play with these, but we're not going to go into answering questions that aren't asked yet because of the fact that, you may eliminate all that. So why set you up for something? So been really fun. I tried to answer like 15, 18 questions there with this a little more in-depth piece. And where these crazy ideas of mine come from? No, they didn't really come from a book. They probably got inspired and got me searching from book material. But anyway, it's really a product of my experience. So I hope that answered your question. Anything else that you'd like on that? Why, feel free. And if you haven't played with those patterns yet and you want to, and you've got a friend you can play with them, someone you can train with that you trust enough to sit with them for a couple hours a week, every other week, why, then it's cool. Contact me and we'll set you up with them. I have a little bit of charge on it just because I had to write all the material, but if you don't have any money, we can delete all that too. I'm easy to go along with anything, whatever you're comfortable with. Hey, no problem. So thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Okay.